The frozen wasteland of Iceland stretched endlessly under a gray sky. Snow fell in thick sheets, covering everything in white. The wind howled across the empty landscape, creating drifts that rose and fell like frozen waves. Nothing lived here except the hardiest plants buried deep under ice. It was the kind of place where silence had weight and cold cut through any protection humans could create. High above this frozen world, something went terribly wrong. A ship moved through Earth's atmosphere, its hull glowing from friction and heat. It was not a human ship. The vessel belonged to creatures from a distant world called Velthur, a planet where massive intelligent beings lived among crystal mountains and warm seas. These beings looked like what humans would call dragons, though they had never heard that word. Inside the ship, 3 of these creatures struggled with failing controls. Kale, the oldest and largest, worked frantically at a console that sparked and smoked. His scales were deep blue, ancient and worn from many journeys. Myra, smaller and golden, tried to redirect power to the engines while calling out readings in their musical language. Torvin, barely past childhood in their species' long lives, held tight to a support beam as the ship shook violently. They had been studying Earth's solar system when a massive solar flare erupted without warning. The electromagnetic pulse fried their navigation systems and tore through their ship's shielding. Now they were falling, unable to control their descent, unable to call for help. Their emergency beacon had melted into slag. Kale made a choice. He aimed the ship toward the most remote area he could find, away from human cities and towns. If they were going to crash, they would not take any of this planet's inhabitants with them. His people had strict laws about protecting primitive worlds. Even dying, he would follow those laws. The ship hit the ice with tremendous force. Metal screamed and tore. The 3 dragons were thrown forward, their safety harnesses the only thing keeping them from being smashed against the walls. Ice sprayed upward in a massive cloud. The vessel carved a deep trench before finally sliding to a stop. Half buried in snow and frozen ground, for several minutes, none of them moved. Pain radiated through Kale's body. He tasted blood in his mouth. Slowly, carefully, he turned his massive head to check on the others. Myra was conscious but bleeding from a gash on her shoulder. Torvin groaned but was alive. They had survived the crash. But as Kale looked at the damage surrounding them, he knew survival might only be temporary. The ship's core was cracked. Warning lights flashed red throughout the cabin. Outside, through the broken viewport, he saw only endless snow and ice. Myra pulled herself upright with effort. She moved to the communications array and tried to activate it. Nothing happened. She tried again, cycling through backup systems. All dead. Their long-range transmitter had been destroyed in the crash. The nearest Velthur ship could be months away, and without a beacon, they would never find this remote location. Torvin managed to open the emergency supplies locker. He pulled out thermal blankets and medical supplies. His movements were shaky, uncertain. This was his first real mission away from their homeworld. He had been so excited when Kale chosen for the team. Now fear showed clearly in his young eyes. Kale forced himself to stand. Every movement hurt, but he was the leader. He needed to assess their situation clearly. He activated his personal scanner and checked the external environment. The temperature outside was far below freezing by their standards. The atmosphere was breathable but thin of oxygen. His scanner detected no intelligent life for many kilometers. They attempted repairs for the next 3 days. Kale and Mira worked on the ship's core while Torvin tried to salvage anything useful from the damaged systems. But the cold was relentless. Every time they went outside to work on the external hull, they had to retreat within minutes as their biothermal energy drained away. Their bodies could regulate temperature for a while, but not indefinitely in these conditions. The ship's heating system failed on the 4th day. They huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat as their ancestors had done in the old times before technology. Myra created a telepathic link between them so they could share thoughts and feelings without speaking. It helped maintain morale, though all 3 knew the truth they did not want to say aloud. They were going to die here. On the 7th day, Kale made the hardest decision of his life. He gathered Myra and Torvin close and explained what they must do. To conserve their remaining energy, they would enter a deep hibernation state. Their bodies would slow down dramatically, using minimal power to survive. It might give them a few more weeks. Perhaps, if they were incredibly fortunate, a Valther patrol might pass close enough to detect their ship's residual signature. It was a small hope, but it was something Torvin protested at first. He was young and frightened, not ready to give up. But Myra gently explained that this was their only chance. They prepared carefully, positioning themselves in the warmest part of the wrecked ship, wrapping themselves in every thermal material they could find before they slipped into hibernation. Kale sent out one final thought to both of them through their telepathic link. He told them they had served their people with honor. He told Torvin that he had shown great courage for one so young. He told Myra that her friendship had enriched his long life. Then, one by one, they allowed the hibernation to take them far away from the crash site. Across kilometers of frozen wasteland, a small research station stood against the elements. Inside, Dasung sat at his monitoring station, watching screens filled with data about ice movements, temperature fluctuations, and seismic activity. He had been stationed here for 6 months, studying glacial patterns and climate change. It was lonely work, but he found peace in the endless white landscape. Something unusual appeared on his thermal scanner. A heat signature, large and powerful, had appeared suddenly 2 weeks ago. Then it had begun to fade, slowly but steadily. The pattern was strange, not consistent with any known geological or weather phenomenon. His colleagues thought it was just equipment malfunction, another glitch in sensors that constantly battled the harsh conditions. But Daesung was not convinced. He had spent years studying these systems. He knew how they failed, and this did not match any failure pattern he had seen. The signature was too consistent, too regular in its decay. It looked almost like something biological, something alive but slowly dying. He marked the location on his map. It was far, nearly 40 kilometers away across treacherous terrain. Going there would be dangerous and against protocols. He was supposed to report anomalies and wait for official investigation teams. But something about this mystery called to him. Daesung had always been drawn to puzzles that others dismissed. As a child, he found lost things, solved problems that seemed impossible. His grandmother used to say he had a heart that could hear what others could not. Maybe she was right. He watched the slowly fading heat signature on his screen and made a decision. When the weather cleared, he would go and investigate. Something was out there in the frozen waste. Something that might need help. He did not know that this choice would change everything. Not just for him, but for all of humanity. 2 weeks passed slowly at the research station. Daesung continued his regular work, but his eyes kept returning to the mysterious heat signature on his monitors. It grew weaker each day, fading like a dying ember. Whatever was out there would not last much longer. The weather had been brutal. Storm after storm rolled across the frozen landscape, making any travel impossible. Daesung checked the forecast repeatedly, waiting for his chance. His colleagues noticed his distraction but said nothing. Everyone developed their own quirks after months in isolation. Finally, a clear weather window appeared. The forecast predicted 36 hours of relatively calm conditions before the next storm system arrived. It was not much time, but it might be enough. Daesung prepared carefully, checking his snowmobile, packing emergency supplies, food, water, and extra fuel. He left before dawn, telling the station coordinator he was checking on some remote ice core samples. The journey was difficult even in good weather. The snowmobile bounced and slid across uneven ice. Wind cut through his protective gear despite its insulation. But Daesung pressed forward, following the GPS coordinates he had marked. The heat signature was still there on his portable scanner, barely visible now, but present. After 3 hours of travel, he saw something that should not exist. A massive crater scarred the ice, dark and wrong against the endless white. Debris was scattered around it, pieces of metal that looked nothing like any aircraft he knew. The shapes were too smooth, too perfect, following geometries that seemed alien to human engineering. Daesung stopped his snowmobile at the crater's edge and climbed off carefully. His heart pounded in his chest. His breath came in quick clouds. He approached slowly, one hand on the emergency radio at his belt. Though he had no idea what he would say if he needed to call for help, the center of the crater lay a ship. There was no other word for it. A vessel perhaps 30 meters long, its hull a dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Parts of it were buried in ice and snow. Damage was extensive, huge tears in the hull exposed the interior. But it was the three shapes near the ship that made Daesung stop breathing. Dragons. His mind supplied the word even as he rejected it as impossible. Three enormous creatures lay motionless in the snow, covered in frost. They were huge, each one easily the size of a small bus. Their bodies were covered in what looked like scales that caught the dim light and reflected it in strange ways. Wings were folded against their sides. Long necks ended in heads that looked both reptilian and somehow intelligent. Daesung stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. This could not be real. Dragons did not exist. Alien life was still theoretical, unproven. Yet here, before his eyes, impossible things were real. He took a step closer. Then another. His scientific training began to override his shock. He pulled out his thermal scanner with shaking hands and aimed it at the creatures. Heat signatures appeared, faint but present. They were alive? Barely but alive. As he moved closer to the nearest dragon, he saw details that filled him with sadness. The golden scales were dimmed by frost. Ice crystals clung to the creature's face. Its breathing was so shallow that he almost missed it. This being was dying, slowly freezing in the bitter cold. Something moved. Daesung jumped back, his heart racing. One of the dragon's eyes opened slightly, just a sliver of awareness. The eye was large and amber-colored, with intelligence behind it that was unmistakable. This was not an animal. This was a person, a thinking being that understood its own approaching death. Then something extraordinary happened. Feelings flooded into Daesung's mind. Not words, but pure emotion and intention. Peace. No threat. Help, please. The desperation was overwhelming, a drowning person reaching for anything that might save them. But underneath the fear was also resignation. This being had accepted death but still reached out. One last attempt to survive. Daesung stumbled backward, clutching his head. The sensations faded as the eye closed again, the creature lacking strength to maintain whatever connection it had created. But in that brief moment, everything had changed. He had felt another mind, alien yet somehow familiar in its fear and hope. He stood there for several minutes, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to leave, to call for help, to report this to authorities. This was beyond him, beyond anything one person could handle. These creatures needed resources, technology, and expertise he did not have, but another part of him. The part his grandmother said could hear what others could not. Knew what would happen if he left and reported this. Governments would come. Militaries would secure the area. These beings would become test subjects, things to study and dissect. They would die in laboratories instead of under open sky, poked and examined by people who saw them as specimens instead of living, thinking creatures. The golden dragon had asked for help. Not capture. Not study. Just help? Daesung made his decision. He would try to save them. Alone if necessary. The decision was insane, impossible, and completely against every protocol he had ever learned. But it was also the only choice his conscience would allow. He returned to his snowmobile and began taking inventory. He had emergency supplies, some food, thermal blankets, and basic medical equipment. It was nowhere near enough, but it was a start. He set up the portable heater he had brought, positioning it near the golden dragon. The heat was minimal, but it was something. Over the next hour he worked frantically. He arranged thermal blankets over the creatures as best he could, though they were far too small to provide complete coverage. He set up a small tent to act as a windbreak. He placed chemical heat packs near the dragon's heads and chests, anywhere he thought might help preserve vital organs. As he worked, his mind raced through possibilities. The research station had supplies he could use: generators, heating equipment, food stores. He could take them gradually, small amounts that might not be noticed immediately. It would require lies and deception, both things that went against his nature. But he saw no other way. The wind began to pick up. The weather window was closing faster than predicted. Daesung checked his watch and swore quietly. He needed to return to the station before someone came looking for him. But leaving these creatures felt like abandonment. He knelt near the golden dragon and placed his hand gently on her frost-covered scales. They were cold, so cold. He spoke aloud, knowing she probably could not hear him but needing to say the words anyway. I will come back. I promise. I will bring help. Please hold on. For just a moment he felt warmth under his hand. A flicker of acknowledgement, faint as a whisper. Then it was gone, and he was alone with the wind and snow and 3 dying beings he had committed himself to saving. Daesung climbed back onto his snowmobile and began the long journey back to the station. His mind was already working through plans and problems. How to get supplies without being caught? How often he could make the trip? How to keep these magnificent creatures alive long enough for a miracle to happen? He did not know if he could succeed. The odds were terrible. But he had to try. Because in that brief telepathic contact he had felt something profound. He had felt a person reaching out across the vast gulf between species, between worlds, asking for the most basic kindness any being could offer another, the chance to live. Daesung returned to the research station just as the next storm rolled in. Snow began falling in thick curtains, and wind rattled the station's windows. He was exhausted from the journey but could not rest. His mind kept returning to those 3 beings slowly freezing in the wilderness. Every hour that passed reduced their chances of survival. He went to the supply room late that night, after his colleagues had gone to sleep. The station kept extensive emergency supplies, thermal generators, medical kits, high-calorie food rations designed to sustain people in extreme conditions. Daesung began taking items, small amounts that might not be immediately noticed. A generator here, some ration packs there, medical supplies that could be explained as restocking his field kit. Over the next 3 days, while the storm raged outside, he assembled everything he would need. He also studied everything he could find about treating hypothermia and energy depletion. The dragons were not human, but basic biology had to share some common principles. All life needed energy to survive. When the storm finally cleared, Daesung left before dawn again. This time he towed a sled behind his snowmobile, loaded with supplies hidden under a tarp. He told the station he was continuing his ice core work and might be gone for 2 days. His supervisor barely looked up, trusting that Daesung knew what he was doing. The journey seemed longer this time, burdened by the heavy sled and his growing fear that he would arrive too late. But when he reached the crater, his thermal scanner showed 3 faint heat signatures still present. They had survived the storm. Barely, but they had survived. Daesung worked quickly. He set up 2 portable generators around the dragons, positioning them to maximize heat coverage. The generators hummed to life, their warmth spreading into the frozen air. He pulled out the thermal blankets he had brought, much larger and better insulated than his first emergency supplies. He draped them over the creatures, securing them against the wind. As he worked near the golden dragon, Myra, her eye opened again. This time the connection was stronger. Images flooded his mind, not clear like pictures but impressions and feelings. He saw flashes of their biology, how they absorbed energy not just from food but directly from heat and light. They were adapted to a warm world, a place where thermal energy was abundant. Here, in this frozen wasteland, they were starving even as they barely breathed. Daesung understood. They needed more than warmth. They needed a way to absorb energy efficiently. He looked at the equipment he had brought and an idea formed. He had water, heating elements, and concentrated food supplements designed for extreme situations. What if he created heated baths, liquid warmth that could surround them and allow their bodies to absorb energy more directly? He spent hours setting up his system. Using tarps and the dragon's own ship debris, he created a crude basin around Myra. He heated water using the portable stoves and added dissolved nutrients from the emergency rations. The mixture was probably wrong in 1,000 ways, but it was better than nothing. Carefully, he began pouring the warm nutrient solution around Myra's body. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, so gradually he almost missed it, color began returning to her scales. The frost covering her started to melt. Her breathing deepened slightly. It was working. Encouraged, Daesung repeated the process for the other two dragons. He worked until his own hands were numb and his back ached from bending. But he could see changes. Small improvements, but real. They were stabilizing over the following weeks. Daesung established a routine. He would spend 3 or 4 days at the crash site, maintaining the generators, refreshing the nutrient baths and monitoring the dragon's conditions. Then he would return to the station for a day to resupply and maintain his cover story. He told his colleagues he was doing extended field research on ice formation patterns. They had no reason to question him. The constant travel and work exhausted him. He lost weight. Dark circles formed under his eyes. But he could not stop. The dragons were improving slowly but steadily. After the 3rd week, something amazing happened. Daesung was replacing a fuel cell in one of the generators when he felt a presence behind him. He turned and found himself facing Kale, the massive blue dragon, fully conscious and watching him with intelligent eyes. The telepathic connection was different this time, clearer, more controlled. Images flowed into Daesung's mind showing Kale's gratitude, his wonder at what this small human was doing. Kale shared visions of his world, of crystal cities and warm seas, of a civilization that valued peace and knowledge. He showed Daesung their exploration ship's mission, to study and learn, never to conquer or harm. Then Kale did something that surprised Daesung. He showed images of Earth's beauty as seen from space, the blue oceans and green forests. He conveyed profound respect for a world that could produce a being willing to save strangers at great personal cost. In Kale's long life traveling the stars, he had encountered many species. Most responded to the unknown with fear or aggression. This human showed something rarer, compassion. Daesung tried to respond, not knowing if Kale could understand his thoughts. He projected his own feelings, worry about the dragon's safety, fear of what would happen if others found them, determination to protect them until help could arrive. Kale understood. The dragon's massive head lowered until his eye was level with Daesung's face. Another image appeared in Daesung's mind, a rescue ship from Velthar, finally close enough to receive their emergency signals. Help was coming, but it would still take time, perhaps 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks of hiding this secret. 2 more weeks of lies and stolen supplies. Daesung nodded, accepting the burden. What else could he do? But Kale shared one more thing, a warning wrapped in concern. Their ship's energy signature, weak as it was, might be detected by Earth satellites. Governments might already be tracking something unusual in this remote location. Time was running out not just for the dragon's survival, but for their chance to leave quietly without causing chaos. As if summoning the warning into reality, Daesung's radio crackled. It was Hannah, one of the other researchers at the station. Her voice was tense. Daesung, where are you? We need to talk. Some supplies have gone missing and the director wants answers. How soon can you return? Daesung looked at the radio, then at Kale, then at the crash site around him. His secret was unraveling. He had known this moment would come, had dreaded it, but still hoped for more time. He pressed the talk button. I will return tomorrow. There is something I need to show you first. Hannah's response was immediate. What are you talking about? What have you found? Daesung made a choice. Hannah was a good person, a scientist who valued discovery over politics. If anyone would understand, it might be her. And he could not do this alone anymore. He was reaching his limits. Something impossible, he said quietly. I will explain everything when you get here. But Hannah, you need to come alone. Can you trust me on this? There was a long pause. Then send me your coordinates. Daesung looked at Kale, seeking some kind of approval or advice. The dragon's expression was unreadable, but through their connection he felt cautious acceptance. They needed help. The risk was necessary. He sent the coordinates and sat down to wait, hoping he had not just made a terrible mistake. The wind blew across the frozen landscape, carrying snow and secrets. Tomorrow, everything would change again. Hannah arrived the next morning, her snowmobile cutting a path through fresh snow. Daesung watched her approach from beside the crash site, his stomach tight with anxiety. He had spent the night preparing what to say, how to explain. But every planned speech seemed inadequate. For what he was about to reveal, she stopped her vehicle at the crater's edge and climbed off, looking around in confusion. Then she saw the ship. Her body went rigid. Even from a distance, Daesung could see her mind trying to process what her eyes were showing her. "Daesung, what is that?" Her voice carried across the ice, sharp with shock. "Come closer, please. I know this is difficult to believe." Hannah approached slowly, her scientific training warring with obvious fear. She saw the generators, the tarps, the evidence of someone camping here for extended periods. Then she saw the dragons and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. What are they?" "They are people," Daesung said simply. "From another world. They crashed here. They were dying. I have been trying to save them." Hannah stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You have been saving aliens? By yourself? For weeks?" Her voice rose with each question. "Do you understand what you have done? This is first contact. This is the most important discovery in human history. And you have been hiding it?" "To protect them," Daesung said firmly. "Think about what would happen if I reported this. Military forces would come. Scientists who see them as things to study, not beings to respect. These creatures are peaceful. They are explorers, not invaders. I felt their minds, Hannah. They are good. You felt their minds?" Hannah looked even more concerned. "Daesung, are you feeling okay? The isolation, the stress, maybe you are experiencing some kind of break from reality." Before Daesung could respond, Kale moved. The massive blue dragon raised his head and looked directly at Hannah. She screamed and stumbled backward, falling in the snow. Kale remained still, making no threatening movements, just watching her with ancient eyes. Then Kale reached out telepathically, and Hannah's scream cut off. Her expression went blank, then filled with wonder. Daesung recognized that look. She was experiencing what he had, that first touch of another mind. Completely alien, yet somehow understandable. After a long moment, Hannah's awareness returned to her surroundings. She stayed sitting in the snow, staring at Kale with tears running down her face. "I saw," she whispered. "I saw their world. Their people. He showed me his family. His children. He has children waiting for him." She turned to Daesung with new understanding. "They are people. You were right. They are truly people." From that moment, everything changed. Hannah threw herself into helping with the intensity that made her such a good scientist. Her knowledge of biology proved invaluable. She examined the nutrient mixtures Daesung had been using and immediately saw ways to improve them. Within days, the dragon's recovery accelerated noticeably. Torvin, the youngest, fully awakened during the second day of Hannah's presence. His first action was to reach out to her telepathically, sharing his joy at being alive and his gratitude. Hannah, a woman who had dedicated her life to studying life in extreme environments, found herself crying as she experienced the young dragon's enthusiasm for existence. Torvin showed her visions of his world's crystal forests, vast structures grown over millennia that sang in harmonic frequencies when the wind blew through them. He shared memories of bioluminescent oceans where creatures of incredible beauty swam in synchronized patterns. He conveyed wonder at Earth's own diversity, at blue skies and liquid water and the tiny determined humans who had saved his life. Hannah and Torvin formed a special bond. She would sit beside him for hours, sharing stories through the telepathic link. She showed him her own memories of Earth's oceans, of whale songs and coral reefs, of the first time she looked through a microscope and discovered an entire universe in a drop of water. Torvin absorbed it all with the hunger of youth eager to learn everything about this strange new world, but while bonds deepened, so did their problems. Sung-ho, the station director, had noticed the pattern of missing supplies. He was a careful man, methodical, who noticed small inconsistencies. He tracked the inventory shortages back to the times when Dae-sung and now Hana were both absent from the station. On the 7th day of Hana's involvement, Seung-ho appeared on the monitoring station's long-range scanner. He was following their tracks, heading directly for the crash site. Dae-sung and Hana had perhaps an hour before he arrived. They gathered with the three dragons. Kale, now strong enough to stand, looked at the approaching signal on their portable scanner. Through their link, he conveyed understanding and acceptance. They had been discovered. What came next was out of their hands. Myra shared images of their ship's failing systems, detecting Earth satellites passing overhead. She feared their energy signature had already been logged by human technology. Even if Seung-ho could be convinced, others might be coming soon. Military forces, government agencies. The peaceful first contact they had hoped for was slipping away. Torvin, young and impulsive, projected a desperate idea. They could use their ship's remaining technology to erase all evidence of Dae-sung and Hana's involvement. They could make it appear that the humans had never been here, protecting them from any punishment or consequences. The dragons could face whatever came alone. Both humans rejected this immediately. They had come too far, risked too much to abandon their friends now. Hana spoke aloud, even though she knew the dragons could understand her thoughts. "We chose to help you. We knew the risks. We are not leaving you to face this alone." Dae-sung added, "Whatever happens, we face it together." The dragons were deeply moved. Kale shared that even among their own people, such loyalty was rare. Most beings, when faced with potential punishment or danger, would prioritize their own survival. These humans exemplified something the dragons had hoped existed in the universe, but rarely found: the willingness to stand by one's principles even when it cost them dearly. Seung-ho arrived an hour later. He climbed off his snowmobile and stood frozen at the crater's edge, just as Hana had done. But his reaction was different. His face went from shock to calculation to what looked like anger. He climbed down into the crater slowly, never taking his eyes off the dragons. When he was close enough, he spoke to Dae-sung and Hana, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Do you understand what you have done? Do you have any concept of the protocols you have violated?" He gestured at the crash site. "This is first contact. This should have been reported immediately. There are procedures, chains of command, international agreements about how to handle something like this." "They would have died," Dae-sung said simply. "If I had reported it and waited for official response, they would have frozen before help arrived." "That is not your decision to make." Seung-ho's composure cracked. "You are not qualified to represent humanity in first contact. None of us are. This should have gone to the United Nations, to proper authorities who know how to handle such situations." Hana stepped forward. "And what would those authorities have done? Be honest, Seung-ho. Would they have prioritized saving these beings or securing them for study?" Seung-ho opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. They all knew the answer. The truth hung in the cold air between them, uncomfortable but undeniable. Before the argument could continue, a massive storm appeared on the weather scanner. It was moving fast, a wall of wind and snow that would make travel impossible. They had perhaps 30 minutes before it hit with full force. Seung-ho looked at the incoming storm, then at the inadequate shelter of the crash site. "We will freeze if we try to return to the station in this. We will have to shelter here." Kale made a decision. He moved to his damaged ship and, with effort, activated an emergency system. A section of the hull that was still relatively intact began to glow with warmth. The dragon's technology, even failing, was enough to create a heat barrier that could protect them all. The 5 of them, 3 dragons and 3 humans, crowded into the sheltered area as the storm hit. Wind screamed outside. Snow piled up against the ship. And in the small warm space, surrounded by the unknown and the impossible, they waited together. The storm raged for hours, trapping them together in the small heated space within the damaged ship. At first, Seung-ho sat apart from the others, his back against the metal wall, his expression closed. He had tried to use his radio to call for backup, but the storm interfered with all communications. He was cut off from the chain of command he had relied on his entire career. Dae-sung and Hana sat with the dragons. maintaining the physical contact that made telepathic communication easier. The three dragons rested, conserving energy, but remained aware and watchful. The tension in the small space was thick. As darkness fell outside and the storm showed no signs of stopping, Kale made a choice. He reached out telepathically to Seung-ho, though the director had shown no interest in connecting with the aliens. The touch was gentle, patient, asking permission rather than forcing contact. Seung-ho jerked when he felt the first brush of another mind against his. "What are you doing?" "Get out of my head." But Kale persisted, and curiosity won over fear. Seung-ho stopped resisting, and the connection opened. What followed changed everything. Kale shared his memories, not just images but full experiences. Seung-ho felt what it was like to grow up on Velthor, to learn to fly in warm currents above crystal spires, to be part of a civilization that had outgrown war and violence thousands of years ago. He experienced Kale's training as an explorer, the joy of discovering new worlds and studying their beauty without disturbing them. Then Kale showed him the solar flare. The terror of the crash, the slow acceptance of death in the frozen waste. He let Seung-ho feel the moment when Daesung first appeared. The desperate hope mixed with resignation. The wonder when this small human returned again and again to help beings he should have feared. Kale shared his people's philosophy. They believed that true intelligence was measured not by technology, but by compassion. Any species could develop tools and weapons. Only truly advanced beings chose mercy over fear when facing the unknown. Seung-ho experienced all of this in moments that felt like hours. When the connection finally ended, tears streamed down his face. He sat in silence for a long time, processing what he had felt and seen. The others waited, respecting his need to absorb the experience. Finally, Seung-ho spoke. "I have spent my career following rules, proper procedures, chain of command. I thought that was what made civilization work." He looked at Daesung. "But you did not follow any rules. You just saw beings in need and helped them. No committees, no approvals, just action based on conscience." He turned to the dragons. "They showed me their world, their values, and I am ashamed because my first thought was not about saving them. It was about protocols and procedures, about protecting myself and my career." "You are human," Mara spoke for the first time, her telepathic voice reaching all of them. "Individuals can choose compassion. Institutions rarely do. That is why what Daesung and Hannah did is so remarkable. They chose to risk everything as individuals for strangers." Seung-ho nodded slowly. "I understand now. But we still have a problem. My radio is dead because of the storm, but when it clears, others will come looking for me. 3 researchers missing from the station will trigger emergency protocols. Search teams will come. Military forces may already be mobilizing if satellites have detected your ship's signature." Kale shared what he had been reluctant to mention before. Their rescue ship, a full Velthor exploratory vessel, had finally received their emergency transmission. It was en route and would arrive in approximately 4 Earth days. But when it came, it would not be subtle. A ship that size would be detected by every monitoring system on Earth. "You are talking about open contact," Seung-ho said. "Not quiet recovery. Full revelation that alien life exists." "Yes," Kale confirmed. "We had hoped to leave quietly. That hope is gone. The question now is how this first contact proceeds. With fear and weapons, or with understanding and peace." Seung-ho stood and began pacing in the small space. "This is beyond me. Beyond any of us. This decision should be made by world leaders, by people with authority to speak for humanity." "There is no time for that," Hannah said. "In 4 days a ship arrives. What do we tell them? To leave and never come back? To expect hostility? Or do we show them that humanity can be better than our worst instincts?" Seung-ho stopped pacing. "You are asking me to make the most important decision in human history. I'm not qualified for that." "No one is. Then perhaps," Daesung said quietly, "that is exactly why you should make it. Not because you have authority, but because you are here, in this moment, knowing these beings as people rather than threats. You have felt their minds. You know their intentions. What does your conscience say? The storm howled outside. Inside, 5 beings from 2 worlds waited as one human wrestled with a choice that would shape the future. Sung-ho closed his eyes, thinking of everything Kale had shown him. He thought of the world's history, of how often first contact between human cultures had ended in violence and exploitation. He thought of his responsibility, not just to his career or his government, but to the truth of what he now knew. Finally, he opened his eyes. When your rescue ship arrives, I will be there to meet them. Not with weapons, with welcome. I cannot speak for all humanity, but I can speak for myself and for what I know to be right. Relief flooded through the telepathic connection. Myra conveyed deep gratitude. Torvin shared joy so pure it made everyone smile. Kale bowed his massive head in respect. But, Sung-ho continued, I have a request. A condition. He looked at Kale directly. Your people have been watching Earth. You said you were waiting to see if humanity was ready for contact. We are not ready. We are divided, violent, struggling with problems we created ourselves. If your ship reveals itself now, in 4 days, I fear what will happen. Fear will dominate. Militaries will mobilize. The chance for peaceful contact will be lost. Kale listened carefully. What are you proposing? Give us time. Your rescue ship retrieves you quietly, using your technology to avoid detection. Leave behind something that helps us, some gift that improves our world. And then wait. Watch us. When we prove we can care for our own planet and people the way these 3 cared for you, then come back. Make contact then, when we are truly ready. It was Vel, the ancient commander of the rescue ship, who responded. Her presence entered all their minds simultaneously, powerful and wise. She had been monitoring the situation remotely as her ship approached. Human Sung-ho, your request shows wisdom. We have watched your species for many cycles. You have great potential, but also great capacity for fear and violence. We agree to your proposal. We will retrieve our people and depart unseen. We will leave knowledge of clean energy technology, transmitted as data that will appear to be your own discovery. And we will watch. When your kind demonstrates they can extend compassion not just to individuals, but to your whole world, we will return for formal contact. Soho felt the weight of that promise. How will you know when we are ready? We will know, Vel replied. Because beings like Daesung and Hana will not be rare exceptions. They will be the norm. When humanity as a whole shows the courage these 2 showed, we will come. The storm began to clear the next morning. Sung-ho sent a message to the research station explaining that all 3 researchers were safe and returning soon. He crafted a story about a communications failure and emergency shelter. It was believable enough not to trigger deeper investigation. Over the next 4 days, they prepared for the rescue. The dragons regained their strength fully. Torvin spent hours with Hana, exchanging every memory and story they could share. Myra worked with Daesung to understand Earth's ecosystems, fascinated by the diversity of life in such a harsh world. Kale and Sung-ho discussed philosophy and ethics, 2 leaders from different worlds finding common ground in their desire for peace. When the rescue ship finally arrived, it came at night. The vessel was magnificent, easily a kilometer long, but it used technology beyond human understanding to remain nearly invisible. Only those who knew where to look could see the subtle distortion in the stars. The 3 dragons prepared to board. Torvin hugged Hana, an awkward embrace between beings of vastly different sizes, but genuine in its emotion. Myra touched foreheads with Daesung in a gesture of deepest respect. Kale clasped Sung-ho's shoulder gently with his massive claw. You have given us our lives, Kale said through their link. We will never forget. And we will ensure our people remember what humanity can be at its best. As the dragons boarded their ship, Vel's presence filled the minds of the 3 humans one last time. We leave you with gifts. Knowledge that will help your world. But the greatest gift is the truth you now carry. You have proven that humans can choose compassion over fear. Protect that truth. Share it when you can, and know that we will be watching with hope. The ship departed silently, invisible to all but those three humans standing in the frozen waste. When it was gone, they stood together in silence, looking at the stars with new understanding of what existed beyond their small world. They returned to the research station and reported their fabricated story. The data Val had transmitted began appearing in their computers, revolutionary breakthroughs in energy production that would be credited to Sung Ho's research team. The discoveries would change the world gradually,